So Faraz, you had met Aftab Malik November last year at the ISRA event, and Aftab Malik is Australia's Special Envoy to Combat Islamophobia, and he was appointed by the Albanese government September 2024. So at the ISRA event, Aftab talked about his role, and there was another time you spoke to him one-on-one. So I'd love to just hear experiences about your exchanges with Aftab.
Yeah, thank you, Tanan. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you and to Yassir. Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa sallim tasliman kathira. So, look, I mean, you know, as you mentioned, there was a public event held at ISRA in Sydney, and I went there, you know, seeking to sort of really understand what it is exactly Brother Aftab was tasked to do, what the mandate of his role was. And, you know, it was an interesting event, quite frustrating in my view. He sort of, you know, positioned himself and sort of executed as sort of very sincerely wanting the community's best interest. And I say frustrating not because I question that or anything like that, but it's that the way that the event was executed just left a lot of people, at least some people who were there, frustrated, right? That it wasn't sort of, we weren't getting to the point. Like the answers were often sort of skirting around or rather getting to the point. There were some people there that were, you know, sort of there to praise him, it seemed, and very, very positive. And there were people of sort of, you know, for want of a better explanation, like of an ISRA dent. And so, and the host of the event, the MC, who was one of the senior conveners of ISRA, very well known in the community, didn't make it easier either. He interjected a lot, and basically it was a very frustrating event in that regard. So I was left very unsatisfied in terms of you know, the discussion that I wanted to have and the question that I wanted answered. So there was a person sort of in the middle who was able to go back and forth with him, and I reached out and I said, look, I want to set up a meeting. I want to sit down and have a chat, and I did. So we sat down. I think it was November, December, one of those 2 months. Can't find the exact date if needed, but we sat down and it was a good conversation. It was a, you know, brotherly conversation. It was had with a good sort of tone and atmosphere and all that sort of stuff. And it gave me a bit of an insight, right, into some of the machinations of the role, how it came about, how Aftab sort of stepped into it, what sort of mindset, and we can obviously unpack some of that. And I guess, you know, there was a part of me which was like, all right, let's see what happens, right? Although I had a very strong view on the role itself, and I was hugely skeptical of what was and was not possible with it. But I thought, okay, fine, let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens. And it didn't take very long, like weeks after that. And of course, now it's been months that there has been so much evidence for what this role is there to do. And of course, we have to understand it at a political and community level, and we will today with Yassir's support. But that's been the sort of, you know, like just very frustrating to see what's happened after that. And I can't help but think, with the time that's gone since that, why did you take the role? Like, why would you take this role? It makes zero sense. If you stepped into it with so much speculation, and I know I'm sort of glossing over the details here, which we'll get to, but that's my overall sort of thinking, is that the role is utterly useless. It's not going to make any difference. It's there to do a particular job in and for the community, and not for in the sense of in favor of the community. And it just sort of begs the question: why would someone take that role who is seeing this happen firsthand? So that's the overall reflection. That's how I feel a couple of months after the conversation. Tanzan.
So in terms of, yeah, sorry, were you saying yes here?
No, I'm not saying anything.
No? Okay, so it's interesting. You're sort of emphasizing why would he take that role? What do you think is the reason? Like, did you ask him?
Yeah,
like, you know, why did you take that role? Did you ask him?
So I mean, the overall
and what was his response?
The overall thrust of that to that particular question was that the role was taken in good faith as an opportunity to serve the community and to push back against Islamophobia. Right. The brother's narrative was that there is a lot of Islamophobia; it's rampant, and he saw this as a chance to fight back against that. That he genuinely feels in the work that he's done in the policy space And of course, he's got a background in this particular sort of space, advising government on a policy to do with the Muslim community, that he feels that he's made a difference and that it is possible to make a difference. And at that level, you can make a difference. And so he felt that that could be done. And that's why he took the role on, right? He made the point that, or that it came out through the discussion, that several people had been canvassed for the role. From my sort of networks in the community, I know some of those people. I know some of the people who either put their hand up and were not successful, or that were approached and turned it down. And they turned it down for particular reasons, because they realized what it would come with, right? Brother Aftab took it up in spite of these issues. And according to him, and I take this at face value, he begrudgingly took it up. Like he was definitely in split minds about it, right? He wasn't jumping into it because he saw some of the dangers and the challenges of how significant apparently the Islamophobia problem is, according to him, and how challenging the role would be, and the criticism that it would receive from the community as well. So that was sort of his sort of thrust, that notwithstanding some of those issues, he took it on in order to make a difference. That was the overall thrust of why he stepped into the role.
I might shift it to Yassir, and then you can take over, Faraz, in terms of what you make of Aftab's response as to why he took the role.
You're asking me why he took the role?
No, as in, what do you think of his response for taking that role? Like he's explained to Faraz, like this is the reason, because he feels like he can make change in the space, etc., etc. What do you make of that response?
Like Faraz said, I take it on face value. I mean, yeah, it's not really my domain to enter and question people's intentions and so forth. Allahu alam, the reasons are. So if he says it's his way of trying to make a difference, then I believe him. Yeah, so I guess Faraz's question, though, was speaking more to the frustration of, if you can recognize the kind of web of power and the limitations of the position and all the traps, why would you enter it? And in contrast to that, Aftab believes he can make a difference. He can play the game. So, yeah, I guess that's why he did it. He has confidence that he can do something.
100%. I think he very much believes that. And I think if I was to get straight to the point of one very problematic stance, I feel that he has, and Yassir, we can get into this part of the conversation straight away, because I think this is where there's an important benefit to the community, in the community knowing this, right? And unpacking this a little bit. And that is this idea that the structural nature of Islamophobia, right, or Islamophobia as a form of racism, is something that is up for debate. It's something that is up for question. Now, in the event, and it was a public event, so I'm not disclosing anything here that happened privately in our conversation between me and Aftab, and I want to be very conscious of that, right? The brother met me in good faith, and I met him in good faith, and there are things that I will not go into that he reflected upon. So I want to make that very, very clear, and for the public record, that this is not about having had a personal conversation and then airing it publicly. Not at all. I'll only make reference to those things which sort of went to ideas and sort of policy and were mentioned at the public event. I won't be going into any sort of personal reflections or things that I would not want spoken about from a one-on-one discussion if I was in his shoes. But a very important point that he made at the ISRA event on the public record is this idea that, there are these people that talk about Islamophobia as a form of racism, as a structural sort of thing. And they come from a certain viewpoint. And I'm going to get straight to this because, Yassir, you know exactly where I'm going with this, right? And then the word postmodernist was thrown around, like postmodern theory. And I think he even mentioned Marxist, sort of post-Marxism, post-Marxist thinkers, right? That a lot of this is coming from there. And we were sort of very familiar with this because this is a discussion that's been had in the Muslim community, in the Twitter space, Muslim Twitter and elsewhere. And it's part of the broader culture wars, right? That anyone who is opining that structural forms of oppression are indeed that, are systemic, are deep, and are forms of racism, must be a crazy lunatic postmodernist who, is a LGBT activist or confused about their gender or whatever else, like all the stereotypes that get thrown around. But this is interesting in this context, right? Because for me, it makes me question, well, what other understanding of Islamophobia is there if it's not that, right? If it's not that, then is it really that? And we weren't able to unpeel this in the ISRA event, but it sort of came out in conversation, right? And it came out in my discussion with him as to where the solution is. And it very much seems to me that taking all of that together, that his perspective is that Islamophobia is about the ignoramus or hater, the bogan on the street that does something stupid to a woman in hijab or does an incident. And the problem is ignorance, right? Their problem is ignorance. That's the reason why they're behaving the way that they're behaving. And this was the sort of tenor that I was sort of left with. And then, Brother Mehmet Ozal from ISRA stepped in at one point, and he equated that situation that we're living in today to the situation of the Prophet ﷺ. And he made the point that how did he combat that? With knowledge, right? With activism centered on knowledge and enlightening people about Islam. And if we do that, and if we do that enough, we do da'wah and we do all these sorts of things, then we can fight back against Islamophobia. And of course, that is a very controversial position to take, because you can't, on the one hand, sort of recognize the structural elements of it, which Aftab seemed to sort of touch upon, and then be like, no, the real problem is like ignorance and fighting these sorts of tiny little battles, which we can unpack as to whether that's so that's a very important point that I think needs to be put on the public record, that I think quite openly almost. I don't think Brother Aftab is on this understanding that Islamophobia is truly something systemic. I would put that like that on the public record, that I don't think he believes that. Otherwise, I don't think a person can take this role, right? And that's why for me it's a poison chalice for that reason. That and again we'll get into this, but this is what I fundamentally think. So Yassir, I mean, I'm interested in your immediate reaction to that, as someone who has very much faced this for many years. What's your first reaction when you hear that?
Well, terms like Marxist and postmodern are often instrumentalized and used as defenses for people to not think structurally. I've heard this, as you said, within the peak ends of the Cultural War, when critical race theorists and all the rest were characterized in a very Trumpian light as, bulging-eyed fanatics who want to destroy society, don't believe in reality, have totalized the system and act in bad faith, and ultimately are ideologues who are hijacked by the leftist thinking. It's all caricatures. It's ironic, because if we take racialization, not racism, racialization as the construction of an other that you can dismantle through character assassinations, then the racialization of the race critic also exists. And that racialization means that the race critic is again, not an actor of good faith, wants to destroy. It's kind of like a primal terrorist figure, not quite the terrorist, but carries similar symptoms, hates society, doesn't believe in working with anybody, it rushes to make binary thinking of us and them. So my initial reaction is it's not a new play. It is the conservative impulse of racial societies to defend itself against racism, to characterize the race critic as totalizing. Now, in contrast, to reduce racism to ignorance or fear or a psychological or some form of cognitive distortion is ultimately a type of anti-racism the state's interested in, because it centers around the racist, it centers around white Australia and how to rescue it from its perceived errors. And if we could just give them, knowledge or get into contact with them, and the evoking of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and the seerah as an exemplar of this is we must combat it. All of that flies in the face of history, like all of it. And we would have to bend a lot of history to make this work. We would have to say that white Australia doesn't know Indigenous Australians, has had no contact with them, are ignorant of their life, and we would have to continually make exemptions for this. We'd have to say the French don't know the Algerians, the colonizer never knew the colonized, the Israeli doesn't know the Palestinian. All of this ultimately is wishful thinking and optimism that we can just present to the world the correct temperature Muslim, the correct view of our deen and who we are, and ultimately the racist will, as our judge, as an observer, will melt away their hatred and their ignorance and accept us. It is nonsense. It's historically inaccurate. It is the type of racism that the state wants to fight because, as I said, it centers notions of social cohesion and so forth and whatnot. So I'm not going to take seriously the argument of postmodernism and Marxism because I promise you, I've yet to hear a proper definition of what they mean when they call us Marxist or postmodern. If anything, I could reverse the claim they are more postmodern than me, in the sense that they empty any term of its historical reference and terms become floating signifiers that are only attached to what you want them to mean. One of those is Islamophobia, right? It has no historical anchor. It's not attached to colonial or political infrastructure. It's just in the mind of the subjective
Just about
viewer.
individual bad behavior in a vacuum.
That seems to me a little bit more, in their definition of what the postmodern is, that seems a bit more postmodern than what we're saying. We historicize it, return it to power, or recognize it as institutionalized, weaponized, instrumentalized, and that educated people, less educated people, somewhere in the middle of education, Islamophobia is utilized. And not only that, here's the kicker, here's the real counter. It doesn't explain internalized Islamophobia. It doesn't explain how Muslims grow up with a sense of fear, shame, or aggression, or self-aggrandizing views of Islam to deal with the way we're being treated. Are you saying that Muslims don't know their deen? Right? It doesn't explain how communities police each other on the behalf of the state. Right? It doesn't explain things like CVE when the majority of arrests. Now, Aftab should know a lot about CVE, but it doesn't explain any of that. It doesn't explain how Muslim society, majority ones, can sit on their hands while a genocide occurs. It doesn't explain any of those things. Ignorance does not tell us anything about all of these actions. So it opens up more questions. Now, it'd be better for us to ask, in an act of generosity, say, let's grant that this is a version of racism, hatred, ignorance, fear, all the rest, cognitive distortions, like the racist isn't thinking straight. SubhanAllah. Like, let's just concede that's one version. There are contests, right? There are contests around racism. And then in any hierarchy, such as the one we're dealing with, when the government is funding the fight against racism, right? They're going to choose the version of racism that suits their interest. That's the way politics works. And we as a community can talk back, can test back. And one of the limitations that Aftab has is he has to align with the definition that the government wants, because that's his job, right? And I'll throw this question.
And that in some ways is getting to the crux of the issue, right? Like that's the big elephant in the room. And I want to just sort of very upfront have this sort of question posed and sort of discussed, Yassir, with you, is like, how can people not realize that the very thing that these governments have helped institutionalize, proliferate, how would they ever give us any authority, agency, etc., to fight that? And like, what is it that they're getting at by giving us the illusion that there can be this office that can fight the very thing that they've spent so long sort of establishing? Or is that the problem? Is that these people genuinely, in order to sort of play into this, to take up roles like this, they genuinely, truly do not believe that those governments are the root cause?
Yeah, look, I think there's some level of sincerity in the fact that people are socialized into believing racism is bad manners and on the fringes of society. I think that's ideology at play. Like, no one wants to believe. Sometimes we say, the phrase we use is the post-racial. We live in an era which is ironically one of two things: racism generally for the civil middle ground of society, for the civil servants and civility, right? Racism is bad. Like, nobody wants to be called a racist, right? And yet racism persists. I mean, here's the other thing. Like, if if Aftab wants to talk about racism as an act of ignorance and so forth, it has a lot to explain about Australia's treatment of Indigenous Australians and the construction of whiteness. So, and then also, debate around native title, land rights, sovereignty. Like you have a lot to do to unpack this idea, like the treatment of Indigenous Australians. But let's go back to your question of sincerity. Do they genuinely believe it? Maybe. But here's the thing: like I don't know. Although my other job is working in psychology, my job here is not to try to understand the psyche behind the people who want to believe it up until it explains violence. Like I don't want to weigh and measure hearts and sincerity. I can discuss this at another level, at a contest, and say, if you genuinely believe it, then explain this, explain that. Tell me why this isn't happening. For example, let me speak to both of you and me. If Islamophobia is rampant, just genuinely, like a genuine question, I don't know what your answer is going to be, so I'm going to throw it out there. I could be as shocked as anything. How many times have you been sworn out at the street? How many times in your working environment have these kind of overt acts of Islamophobia confronted you? That's part A, my question. And part B, how difficult has your life been as a Muslim man, watching, I'll go back to 2000, we'll start with 2001, right? Iraq, Afghanistan before Iraq. We could go way back, but we can go on and on, right? Watching every aspect of the Muslims' life, from what we wear to what we eat, to how we marry, to our attitudes towards truth and gender, every aspect of our life. And then watching Muslims get displaced, killed out major cities. Like we're not just talking, like Syria and Iraq, a bit like the UK and France to Europe, man. They're the heartbeat of the Muslim Ummah in many different ways. And then, of course, there's Palestine. And we can go look at Neymar and what's happening in China, and then Central Africa Republic. Like there's so much. Now you can compare all of that and what we've had to endure, from counter-terrorism legislation to CVE, all of this, right? That we have had to endure in forms of resisting the massive amount of violence against the Ummah. And I want to ask you, both of you, which of these two models, the daily interpersonal stuff, has impacted you, or the ongoing displacement, killing, and the war machine that has impacted the Ummah? Which has hurt you the most? Which has shaped your life the most, right? And so the question I'm asking to all of them is like, I'm sorry, I don't get told go back to where you come from as nearly as much as you guys fantasize. I really don't. I don't know about you guys. I don't get, and even if I did, so what?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
what?
Absolutely. I don't think that overt form of insult, that stuff that sort of that invokes is as bad. And
Now,
I mean, it's at more implicit levels, right? It's at more structural levels, the glass ceilings and all that sort of stuff that we well know. I think that's more there. It's the
further, bro. Yeah, sorry, continue.
No, I mean, like for me, it's in the unsaid things in society, right? It's in the values, it's in the norms, it's in the customs, it's in what you can and can't be as a person. I think it's more at that level rather than, "Oi, Muslim, get out of this country," right? I think it's at that level.
But it's the unsaid, because, as I've said in the definition of Islamophobia that I adopt, it's a form of governance, which means society is happy with you to an extent. They'll tolerate you. They may give you a bit of stare, this and that, whatnot,
Yep.
and microaggressions, up until you resist.
Yes.
Up until your politics is Islamic or Ummah centered. Up until you want Australia to move in a different direction. And then that form of governance comes down. Right?
That's right.
And so that, for me, is what Islamophobia is. Like the idea, like if you look at Islamophobia register and their reports, the visuals in these reports are, subhanAllah, like they've got brothers and sisters with their hands in their face, their face in their hands, and they're like teary. And you have to ask this, structuring Islamophobia in Australia, where the Australian Muslim is a victim of this like ongoing interpersonal racism, which I don't think is consistent. I work at Islamic schools, and I ask. I mean, it's a bit of a bubble, sure, but they still live out in the real world. And honestly, the amount of times they literally come up to me like, "Mister, I've never suffered Islamophobia," but they have. But the problem is that they haven't got the language to explain what it is. What they're really saying is, no one has ever told me in any of these statements that no one's told me I'm a terrorist. No one said any of these things. Yeah, but some of them are saying, they get more interpersonal racism from other Muslims. And so then what happens is you create this language where you're like, well, there's anti-blackness in the community, there's some anti-Desi sentiment, and there's some anti-Arab sentiment as well. And then if that's your measure of Islamophobia, I'm sorry, they used the example of the sister that got her hijab ripped off in Epin. From the report, she was Turkish, right? And if you want to talk about anti-hijab sentiment, you'll find it in Egypt, you'll find it in Iran, you'll find it in Turkey. So you have to understand that structurally speaking, I don't know what they're talking about. And then it goes to the point of governance, Faraz. And I'm thinking we miss something here. You said it perfectly. That atmosphere, it's invisible, it's there. We absorb it, we see it, but ultimately it's suspended. It's like a suspended sentence. And then if you decide to speak out, if you decide to challenge cherished norms, one of the things that I've never fully comprehended is that when I question cherished institutional, liberal, commonsensical things like democracy, it's my own community that comes from me, bro. Right? It's because the idea that you can challenge these things as a Muslim maybe evokes a trauma response, this is not something that we can do safely. It's not.
This is how I explain it, right? In terms of what you're sort of saying. It's the invisible parameters that you only know when you get close to the edge, right? And if you hit the edge, then you really know, because it comes down on you like a ton of bricks. And when people around you, your own community, to your point that you're just making now, when they sense you going close to those parameters and they think that what you're doing is going to disrupt it for everyone, they become the biggest policeman. Right?
Of course. I mean, that's
they become the biggest policeman.
Yeah, so when you understand Islamophobia as governance, you'll understand some very interesting. It will make more sense. The whole point we create definitions is to help us create paradigms so we can make sense of different incidences in our reality. If Islamophobia is purely about ignorance and miseducation and fear, it doesn't explain a lot. It may explain some things, but not a lot. But if Islamophobia is a form of governance, it explains a lot more. Right? And it's our job, if we're going to combat something, is to throw the web of meaning out there so we can understand a lot more about what it's saying. And to your point, you know what's another way of governing us? Right, not only through Islamophobia, but dictating what type of anti-racism and anti-Islamophobia also benefits the state. Can I tell you a quick story? I find it a funny story. Just bear with me here. We know this person, but I'm going to change their name. I'm going to call them Moe. Moe calls me up one day and he says, listen, bro, I'm part of my corporate, or he works for government, I can't remember, it's public servant, whatever. In and there is the problem, but whatever. And Moe is saying HR are doing their thing and whatnot, and every week they have to give a talk about some form of discrimination. And Moe is tasked with speaking about Islamophobia. It's happened a couple of times that people call me up and they're like, we're going to give a talk at my workplace. And I go, yes, can you run through my speech with me? All right, let me know. So they come back a week later and Moe starts talking to me and he's speaking over the phone about his presentation he's going to give the next day to his corporate, I think it's a corporate job, and he's going to present what Islamophobia is to his fellow colleagues who majority are non-Muslims. I know Moe, grew up with Moe. Moe's a nice Arab boy, all right, alhamdulillah, yeah. Moe starts talking, he goes, I grew up in Australia and I love this country, etc., etc., etc. And then he highlights an incident when Pauline Hanson, I think she was in the Senate, pulled off the burqa. And then he's like, and that day I felt unsafe as an Australian. I was made to feel like an outsider. Now, I know Moe. I said, stop, bro, just hang on a second. And he goes, what, you don't like? I go, hang on. Did you really feel unsafe? And he said, no. I was like, why are you saying that? And we unpacked that it's almost an expectation for us to talk a particular way when we speak about anti-racism. It's tapped into a lack of belonging, a lack of safety, a kind of guilting to white Australia of not living up to its own values. Like, oh, Australia hurt me because it was supposed to be the land of the free, but it wasn't. This kind of talking is centering the fiction that is white Australia and its own values. And I'm always playing this role. And I go, bro, just stop. Tell me what you really think. Like, no censor. Just tell me what you really think. What do you really think of Pauline Hanson? I won't repeat what he said because we'll keep the show halal, right? But he didn't care. So between her and Allah, like, bro, on the day of judgment, she'll see her. That's us, man. We're not this constant need to play victim. We have depending on how you want to describe it, at the very one way, civilizationally, we have 1,400 years worth of civilizational weight, aesthetic, legally, spiritual, moral, ethical, literature and art to prop us up and provide soothing and political responses. This constant idea that we have to speak of anti-racism as something that prevents me from belonging, prevents me from being properly Australian, is a narrative that ultimately centers that the solution to racism is to be more Australian. And that when you think about what white settlement is, that's amazing, right? And that's why it's a whole social cohesion narrative. And then Maui adopts this kind of inauthentic response, which is not indigenous or native to his own lived experience. Bro, I'm not asking to belong to Australia. I'm angry. But I can't say that as an Arab man, can I, Faraz? I'm angry. I'm angry at what's happening in Palestine. I'm angry at what they did in Iraq. I'm angry at what they did in Afghanistan. And then I am censored because I become angry. My own community will ultimately police me, and then I'll have all sorts of CVE type of indicators.
Well,
so
interesting phrase you mentioned there. Sorry to finish off your thought, but I think it's a good note to pick up.
No, I was just saying, the final point here is be wary that certain types of anti-Islamophobia are also part of Islamophobia.
Yeah.
Certain types of anti-racism are also part. Yeah. Please continue.
No, it's very profound. And I think one thing that you touched on is social cohesion, right? Which, speaking of the Islamophobia Envoy, is a space that he's done a lot of work in, right? CVE, social cohesion, they sort of collapse into each other. There's a lot of overlap between them. And I think it's really worth sort of bringing the conversation there for a second. Because it's like an elephant in the room. Like it's a really, really hideous part of the history of our community over the last 10 years. And the envoy has been a part of that, right? Now, again, it's not to say that you can't do that with good intention. And some of what has been mentioned by him in public settings or attributed to him by others in the community is, and he's not the only one. There are other people in the community who have held this perspective, is that there are some Muslims who are out to do so much harm to society that Muslims should be involved in their policing, that Muslims should be involved in their monitoring, reporting, because that is the greater good. And that is part of our job as Muslims. And that's really what's at the essence of the whole CVE space, countering violent extremism, for those people who are not familiar with it, which was this sort of, it was the next phase after like the outright war on terror sort of phase, which was just like, you know what, Muslims are out to cause harm. Let's just jail them up. Let's just lock them up. If certain people think certain things associated with certain things, they're game, right? And then it was countering violent extremism, and then it was social cohesion after that. We can see the softening over time as, I suppose, the so-called domestic threat reduced, right? Or it became unpalatable to sort of couch your engagement with the Muslim community in terms of countering violent extremism, because it's just so demeaning, right? It's so undignified. Like you brush an entire community with this idea of, violent extremists are going to come from there. Let's counter them, and we're going to pay certain Muslims to do our job and police them internally, and then report them to us, right? So it has softened over time as they've realized certain things are outright rejected or very, very much opposed in the community. But what are your thoughts, Yassir, on these two broad phases that I've described, CVE and then social cohesion,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
and the
So
Islamophobia
let's
sort of
start.
space?
Yeah. So let's start. Well, as I said, my definition of Islamophobia is that ultimately it's a form of governance, and at the worst end of that governance, it will just kill. Its form of governance, it will kill indiscriminately if it has to. It will drop bombs on hospitals and schools and say terrorists are inside those places, right? At the quote unquote softer level, it will shame you and expect you to perform a particular type of nationalism in order to be worthy of belonging. Either way, we feel the pressure to ultimately perform. Whether you're the good Muslim, the bad Muslim, the in-between Muslim, there's no real correct temperature Muslim here. You are going to be governed because you're ultimately on a suspended sentence. Right? That's what racism does. But also, why does it exist? It exists because there is a need for it to exist. It's not the result of misunderstanding, and those needs are ultimately geopolitical, economic, and historically tied to the way colonialism built our modern world. And the way that colonialism built our modern world was a significant amount of violence went to Muslim-majority countries to fracture it, break it up, contest it, redraw its borders, extract its resources. And if you don't know this, then you shouldn't be talking about racism. That's bottom line for me. If you don't know the history, you shouldn't be talking about racism. Okay, you're basically talking about good manners and bad education and prejudices and biases, which is fine. If you want to talk about prejudices and biases, and that's fine. Everyone has them, right? But if you want to talk about racism, then you're going to have to take it back to its historical origins and so forth, and how it created our modern world, how it instituted various standards about what is normal, what is abnormal, what is beauty, what's not beauty, what's knowledge, what's not knowledge, who deserves to live and who doesn't, who lives in the zone of being, who lives in the zone of non-being, and so forth. And we only have to look and compare and contrast the lives of the majority in the global south compared to the lives of the minority in the global north, right? Yeah. So once you understand that history, you have to understand that the management has to continue of maintaining that order. So what happens when you spend decades, if not a century, killing people, suppressing them and oppressing them? Uprising happens. Violence happens. Cycles of violence happen. And it has to continue. And then you create dictators and you fund these dictators and so forth. And then there's uprisings and so forth. And the whole world has to be policed to maintain this particular order. And then what happens is that people who are oppressed don't like being oppressed, bro. Like and then what happens is that after continuations of wars and fabricated notions of nationalism and false borders and whatnot, you find that there are different indigenous mobilizations, one of which is Islamism, one of which it's grounded in the region, in this idea. It comes from the failure maybe of Pan-Arabism, whatever. One of them is that. And then now what we have is we have to police and control this. And the best way to police and control this is to create variant versions of what it means to be Muslim, Arab, a nation, and so forth. So you can come to me and say, hey, there are Muslims out there that have very bad ideas and want to see the world burn, or whatever. Or they have bad Islams. Okay. But sure, if you genuinely wanted to fight that, you would have to find the root cause and the source of that. Yeah, it's no point but as long as you're imposing violence, this is the thing about CVE. You're trying to tell me that a bad mosque in Lakimba or Preston or whatever, I'm just choosing two because they're not bad mosques, but whatever. The imagination is that there's some, crazy mullah type figure who's radicalizing people and printing on. And this is what Aftab was talking about. If you read his early works, that's what he's talking about. Like there's a kind of jahiliyah or tribalism that's infected in the modern Muslim brain, and they've come out there and they don't know how to deal with modernity, and there's a resentment. It's Orientalist as hell. It's Bernard Lewis stuff. Bernard Lewis is like basically Muslims have this anger and resentment because we're not winning, right? And then we just want to burn the world. Now, okay, this idea that these mosques and these people create these bad ideas, what do you think radicalizes more? Seriously, genuine question to everyone. What radicalizes more? Watching 18 months of Muslim, Palestinian, Arab children get slaughtered and no one do anything about it? Watching the other side almost gloat about it? Watch us get gaslit? And watch this happen decade after decade after decade, right? And then on top of all that, insult our religion, insult our prophet, insult our way of life, what do you think radicalizes more? And then on top of all of that, our Muslim majority countries seemingly don't know how to protect us. Now, you have to erase all of that violence and then tell me this individual has a bad version of Islam and we need to correct it. Okay. Okay, they have a bad version of Islam. Correct it. Guess what? The cycles of violence that create these bad versions, quote unquote, of Islam continue. They're funded. They're paid for with our own taxes, right? The bombs are still dropping, right? And so if you were genuinely against countering violent extremism, you would counter the violent extremism of the West, but they don't. They don't.
Yeah.
Right? And Aftab's an example of this. He has to whisper Palestine, bro. He has to whisper.
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
I don't. So we haven't even got to that part. But I mean, yeah, it's a profound little sort of series of reflections they've made there. So I mean, how do you? And this is something I've been trying to grapple with as well. How do we come to terms with Muslims who themselves are involved in this activity, the CVE, this social cohesion?
Yeah, this is
and
what
what
I mean.
credentials do they have left to? What credentials do they have left to fight Islamophobia, in any sense of the word?
Well, this is the problem when we are. There's all sorts of violences that occur. We're talking about mostly the material one, but other forms of violence is the ongoing erasure and forgetfulness of who we are and where we come from. A lot of Muslims, unfortunately, are filled with this compulsion to prove our value, prove our worth, prove our humanity, because racism shames us. And that's another form of governing. It's kind of like a parental model where you're not good enough, you don't have the right values. We always represent the lack of what Europe has, the lack of science, the lack of ethics, the lack of gender equality, every lack you can imagine. We are basically the inverse of Europe's enlightenment. We're darkness, right? We're stuck in and so forth. And a lot of people internalize this idea that therefore they have to continually counter them. So great shame and embarrassment. Like the amount of Muslims I know that when a terrorist event happens overseas, they're like, oh no, they take responsibility for it. They don't read it as a geopolitical, historical phenomena. They really read it as a responsibility. You have to ask them, why do you feel responsible? I guarantee you when a white fundamentalist goes in and shoots up a school, right? My white friends aren't going, oh my God, what have we done? I have to go out there and explain it and apologize for. Maybe some, I don't know, but the majority don't go, oh no, like we feel this huge burden. So one of the ways we're governed is through this psychological mechanism where we constantly have to show that we're not terrorists. We're not sympathetic to terrorists. And so that impulse also, when you tie it to the idea, I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt. A lot of Muslims think Islam is beautiful. And it's like, okay, and it's a form of dawah. We have to show the best side of it. And then when you couple the impulse to give dawah with the shame of that we're being othered, that's a powerful mix. And then, bro, I'm just going to say something because I'm going to be cynical. Also, there's money involved. CVE doesn't come to us as an opportunity. It comes to us with a check, right? It comes to us with grants. We'll do this, you do that, and so forth, and mashallah. And then it comes with career opportunities. Like, I'm not going to hide that element of it, right? So, there's multiple layers to it of why they do it. And then you say, well, what can we do to these Muslims? Well, bro, sometimes truth works. Sometimes referring to ummah ethic works, and sometimes it doesn't. But ultimately, I've always believed you get the good people, and then hopefully those good people create something, and over time a critical mass and a raising of the political awareness. Bro, I promise you, I'm not trying to take credit. I was anti-CVE like 15, 16 years ago, right? Because it was an extension and continuation of the state's use against all marginalized quote-unquote radical groups. It took the community like 10, 15 years to clock it, right? Right? And they would rather dislike and police people like me and others like me, I wasn't alone, rather than clock it. And that speaks to that internal Islamophobia. It's because
Where do you think things are at right now in terms of how this role has been received or responded to?
Here's something interesting. This is the other thing. This is what I resist when we make racism and Islamophobia stupid. racism and Islamophobia is not dumb. It evolves, because ultimately management and governance have to evolve. The way populations and Muslim consciousness changes means that we have to. The subtle shift you said between CVE to social cohesion, bro, it's the same thing, man. Okay? It's just about managing excesses and violences and radical views, right? Have you not noticed that when we protest for Palestine in a particular way, they say this is a threat to social cohesion?
Exactly right. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's the same thing. It's just managing.
I actually think it's a more pernicious form of it, because it's so paternalistic. It's so like, if we allow certain forms of expression or certain things to be said, this beautiful thing that we've got going might get ruptured. This amazing brotherhood and sisterhood that we have in society, which of course we know doesn't exist because of these.
Also, you get blamed for being divisive. Like, it's incredible for me. Like the one protesting, the one who's marginalized, the one who's been othered, who's been pushed to the margins for all sorts of reasons, who resist this marginalization, suddenly they're divisive. I'm like, well, like, I get accused of that.
The victims of the violence are the divisive ones.
I'm like, the world wasn't united when I was protesting it. So my protest isn't the reason why it's divisive. It was divided to begin with, right?
Yeah.
So it's just another form of governance. So and then when you add the money and you add the shaming and you add, bro, honestly, also listen, let's be clear. Australia's on the surface is a very nice country to live in. It's comfortable in comparison to places we quote unquote come from, right? There's material opportunity that we don't find back home. There's career mobility and advancement, and there's more chance of making more money, right? It's seductive, right? It's closer to the dunya. And if you get to America as well, like, America's a very stratified country, you'll find real poverty there as well. For many Muslims, they look at Australia and say, so much better than back home. It does seduce you, right? They can't make a conceptual connection, that back home is the way it is and Australia the way it is because there's a structure that has created a hierarchy where wealth, talent, has moved in one direction. Right?
Yeah.
And for centuries, and of course it makes sense that when all of that wealth and talent and labor goes in one direction, that place that is
going to be a couple. Yeah,
of course it makes sense. Right? I'm not going to lie to you and say Egypt's easier to live in than Australia. That's not true. But I can also, unless you're racialized into believing, well, the problem with Egypt is Egyptians. And that's what people think. They genuinely think that, right? Because they have no racial literacy to explain it. And that's what racism does. That's a form of God. Well, if you only did your thing, if you only had human rights and all the rest and and democracy and basically Egyptians, you're not European enough. And
to take it back to what we were discussing, how do you think the community's taken this time? So it's a very specific question now. It's about analyzing the way the community's responded. What do you think of how the community has responded to this particular role, this office? What do you make of it?
Position?
Yeah.
No, I don't think there's much confidence at all.
Yeah.
So look, the community, of course, has to grow. It has grown. We are far more politically savvy than we were 15 years ago. Yeah. Absolutely. It's just that the game will. Well, I say that, but then MVM came on the scene. No comment. We'll leave that for I say that. There's still faith in major liberal institutions and liberal motives, like visibility and representation.
Yeah.
There's still faith in that. But mashallah, khair, without being too cynical and disingenuous, I don't think Aftab is without critics, obviously. Yeah.
Well, that's putting it very. That would be putting it very kindly. I think it's the situation is better than that in the sense of there's a lot of skepticism, right? And what I
want to ask you, Faraz.
Yeah.
I think there'll be certain leaders in the community, certain people in the community that know it's all rubbish, make the instrumental call. Aftab is close to power and can get us money and grants and opportunity, and therefore will applause, clap, listen, and provide this cycle of, even if they are cynical, they're like, in their
I mean, I think that's a very profound point. I think that, well, it's not necessarily that he will do that. It's that he's part of an ecosystem
Exactly.
that they have helped build, right? And helping place someone like him, or helping the government find someone like him to be in that position, is all part of this almost symbiotic relationship with government of trust, of working together, of this logic of cooperation, which, and maybe as an aside, we can explore what should the Muslim community's relationship with power and with government be, right? Are there healthy forms of it, which we need for things like services, mosques, disability, domestic violence, etc.? And that is an important question. I think there's no escaping those sorts of community needs. And I don't want to pretend here that the answer is that we completely eschew all government engagement altogether. But on political issues, on issues that go to the heart of what it means to be Muslim in this country, what is and is not acceptable, what form of Islam is and is not acceptable, on that issue, if the government starts to dictate terms by having an economic relationship with you, where your funding of certain projects, initiatives, etc., is tied to what sort of politics you adopt, then we are in a very, very dangerous.
Absolutely.
We're in very dangerous waters. And I think, in fact, I know that the Islamophobia envoy is a part of that ecosystem of deals and deliberation and economic exchange. And it's economic exchange because we know for a fact that as a result of certain cooperation between certain parts of our community and the government, that certain things have become possible for certain parts of our community, which would not otherwise have been possible, right? Grants, significant sums of money, buildings, facilities, etc. And I think the helping the government choose this Islamophobia envoy has become one part of that cooperation.
Absolutely.
Now, it could be well intended. And in fact, I think, unfortunately, and this speaks to the naivety of some of our leadership, that some of it is well intended, unfortunately. I'd rather it be perniciously evil and people just be corrupt sellouts that we can sort of, this label and tarnish and stuff. But I don't think it is. And that's why that's almost gets me more, is that there are at least some people involved in this exchange that actually think they're doing the right thing.
But
sorry.
the problem with the ecosystem is it will reward those people who are ignorant but aligned with interests. So it doesn't matter if they're sincere or otherwise at that ecosystem.
Absolutely.
So
it's not to say that it should matter, or
really like that phrase,
should figure in our analysis.
And it speaks to a couple of things. It's a good way of explaining it. It is a kind of an economy in this way, and there are imperatives. And one of the things is truth is not one of the bottom line, right? Interest is.
Absolutely.
Right? Strategy is.
Absolutely. The bigger picture that we always get told about. Yeah.
And truth, and this is why we sometimes call it pragmatic and so forth, and whatever. But ultimately, it's a sidelining of truth in order to try to dance with the devil a little bit in order to try and get,
Absolutely. That's exactly what it is.
We've been doing it for 20 years and it hasn't worked, bro, because they're a bit more savvy than that. Power doesn't concede easily. Power doesn't give anything for free. Power suspends, And what's interesting about what you're talking about, look, we've just watched, 19 months of Palestinians in Gaza. Like, we've seen the most horrific images that you never thought you'd see. Like, we knew it happened. Like, what's happening, you could make an argument that it's exceptional, but then you look at what happened in Syria, but either way, it's horrible. 19 months. And these politicians, what they do? Tell me, and now they're at the mosques, leading up to the election, throwing grants, promising to build. And so this is the separation. The committed to fighting Islamophobia, to integrate into multicultural social cohesion. And when you speak about Islamophobia this way, you are forsaking Palestine, ultimately. Like, I don't know why you're taking selfies, bro. Like, where were you? Like, you have to ask yourself as an Australian, what's funny? We keep saying things like, oh, what about the Emiratis? What about Saudis? What about Egypt? You say, oh, they all sold out. Well, how are you different? How are you different? Like, if it takes you, at least they're taking billions, bro. You're taking what to fix your mosque number 500. I don't know. How are you different? Yeah, so they come in with this economy, and ultimately, and then we do these things. It's beautiful. I love it. It's strategic. It's kind of like what do we do? Don't worry, brother. I spoke to them about Palestine. I told them. Don't worry. Yeah? They're listening. It happens all the time, man. And then they take their photo, and then politicians play their game. They try to get some votes. And ultimately, not that I don't know why they campaign, but ultimately they know how to control communities. Right? And you have to ask, do they really want our votes, or do they really want to maintain a relationship with the community? Because to manage Muslims, you have to go through these peak bodies, these mosques. Because all these arrests, all the sentiments that come out of it, we are at one level still feared as a civilizational threat, ultimately. Social cohesion does have a fear. The rise of the far right is countered because of the sentiments they have towards Muslims. So Australia doesn't want these kind of race wars. Yeah, it wants to settle things down while allowing Israel to do what Israel is doing, right? And so you have to ask our leaders, what do you think you're going to get out of it?
Mm.
Seriously.
Mm.
And so you have to, the thing is, truth is not the registry.
Yeah.
Strategy is. And the strategy is, you could, I wouldn't, me personally, I could suspend truth for strategy if the strategy worked. Now, brother, we're suspending truth for a strategy that doesn't work.
Mm. So what gives? Yeah.
So what are you in for?
Mm.
Tell me. And it's not new. It's not new, bro.
Let me ask, and I'm conscious of time, and I think we want to sort of keep it to an hour. Probably like 5 minutes left, but there's an important question from all of this, right? So, how I would surmise or how I'd summarize what we've discussed today is that, the position of the Islamophobia envoy is part of a matrix of power relations, right? Of an ongoing economic exchange in our community. And it's part of something structural. So it's not going to, and power is too clever to be allowed to be opposed internally by something that it itself sets up, right? And I think that's a really important way for people to sort of understand, and that's strongly my perspective. But I want to sort of end on a bit of a practical note, Yassir, and that is, what should our response be as a community? What should our response?
You said it before. Look, I've been saying this despite the caricature of me and those like me as Marxist postmodernists who never offer solutions. I've said it for so long. The counter to governance or being governed through Islamophobia is self-determination. We need institutions. You're absolutely right. Certain grants and relationship with society have to be co-authored with society, with Australian institutions, government, have to be. Whether it's housing, whether it's domestic violence concerns, stuff like that. But political advocacy and anti-racism have to stand independently. There have to be institutions that stand independently.
Absolutely.
They can't be bought out by peak bodies and grants. If you look at all of our peak bodies that fight in Islamophobia, all of their definitions of Islamophobia, subhanAllah, all of them, none of them are critical of government or the state or the war on terror.
Yeah.
It's just about what fellow citizens are doing.
That's right, yeah.
Right? And so you have to create an independent body when it comes to any form of political self-determination. They cannot be funded by government. It has to be run by Muslims for Muslims.
By the community,
and representative of Muslims. If you have one, we don't even have one that I can think of. We have little small ones, I don't know.
And this goes to the heart of something, Yassir, in my view. I sort of feel like if the community really needed it, it would happen. If we really needed and wanted it, it would happen. And so it's either one of two things. Either there is no Islamophobia, right? It's just not bad enough at the level of the everyday incidents that happen, right? So it's either that, or it's that we just don't care about the structural sort of parameters within which we work.
You're spot on.
Which I realize that. Yeah.
Can I just say Islamophobia isn't that bad in Australia? I know I'm like the race scholar, right? And
no, I completely agree with you. Yeah.
It's misaligned. The reason why we suffer as a people, as a community, and our heart breaks is because we have been watching Muslims overseas be killed and displaced, and we feel helpless. We can't do anything. And the moment we speak out against it, we're policed, right? We're called terrorists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's just simply not the case that, alhamdulillah, when we see what Muslims in Gaza are going through as one of many, many examples, right? I don't know why I have to talk about how somebody on the street thinks I'm un-Australian or somebody. Don't get me wrong. There are acts of violence in the country. Don't get me wrong. I think they should be policed. I'm not going to reduce Islamophobia, small I Islamophobia to just casual microaggressions. People are insulted. Sisters are targeted.
Absolutely.
Don't get me wrong. But the narrative around that, the discussion around that is should always be tied to the global ummah condition.
Yeah.
And it's not. It's tied to a lack of belonging.
Yeah.
And for me, that's so self-determined. That's a result of us constantly getting funding.
Yeah. For people who don't get this, I think this is such an important point, and I just want to emphasize it and translate it for our everyday folks. What Yassir is saying, I think, is we as a community need to fund this stuff ourselves. If there's going to be genuine anti-Islamophobia activism, and someone's going to lift the lid and genuinely contribute to fighting back, it cannot be with government money. It will never work. It is a poison chalice. It is tied funding. It is asking the oppressor to unoppress you. It's everything, whatever language you can think of to describe it. It's ironic at every level, right? Yeah. And therefore, it needs. And we've been discussing like a practical model for something like this. And we have rich businessmen in this community who will fund to the tune of millions the construction of mosques, centers, and other institutions every year, right? Brothers, literally individual brothers that give millions. It's not even a joke. Right? The idea that our community could not find the money to stand up a couple of academics and junior university students or whatever, and some social media professionals, and maybe one or two administrative type people to create a body, right, with a couple of years worth of runway, right, which brings together knowledge and packages it and helps create content to push back. It's really not beyond conception.
This is absolutely, it's not beyond conception. It's not impractical. Yeah.
No.
Every time we speak of self-determination, there's a fear around it. There is.
And like we have such interesting and innovative things happening in the community in different places, right? Whether it's in the business sphere, in the charity sphere, not-for-profit, etc. I actually think the real issue is we don't believe deep down that the situation is that bad. Otherwise, something would have happened.
Yeah, but you're right. We don't. Yeah. But part of the reason why, no, actually, I would agree with you, and I think you're going to agree with me anyway. You're right. But the problem is we've been miseducated about what racism is.
Sure. Okay? Yeah.
But yet we still suffer. And we suffer politically, emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually because of the structures of the modern world, right? And a lot of that is our lack of self-determination. Let me put it in a simple story. Of all the heartbreaks that I saw of the images that come out of Palestine, or a lot of them, and I'm not going to equate which is worse than what, I remember one of the things that really rattled me, and I couldn't sleep, and I burst into tears. And even thinking about it again, there was a brother in Gaza who went up to the roof, and he's on his phone. He's speaking he's making his dua. He's speaking in Arabic, and he's basically saying, the thing that breaks me the most is the shame of my ummah. Where are you? Where are you? Right? He's calling out to all of us, like, where are you? Where is? And for me, it hit home how helpless we feel. So many of us are like, what do you want me to do? What can I do? Tell me what to do. That hurts us. We want to help. We want to fight. But the structures has made sure that we can't. It made sure that we can't. And that is what's oppressed us. And so then this outlet, I'm like, I'm sorry. Forgive me. Islamophobia Register, ICB, Board of America. They've got I'm not interested. I'm not interested. Yes, I understand that. And let me explain it in another way. I know we're running out of time.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
And this is also why they say things like the first victim of Islamophobia are sisters. They are in one domain, in the interpersonal, on the street, the visible domain. But when you account for policing, war and terror, when you account, then the Muslim male of militant age, right, has been over-policed and represented as the image of Islam that has to be destroyed. Because within that sign of muscular version of Islam that will fight and defend and be militant, right, that has to be destroyed. And colonialism and racism has always had what we call the necrophilic love for the other. Once it kills off our militancy, once it can manage us, once we can no longer do damage or harm or fight back, that's when they romanticize us. That's when they accept us. And you have to kill that off. So there's no point talking about Islamophobia, just about these incidences on the street. Yes, sisters are targeted. You know why sisters are targeted, bro? They're not going to come for you and me. And you know what? We're not going to report it either. Wallahi.
Easy targets, yeah.
Yeah, like if four of us are out in the street, as you know, and some guy says something to you, I'm not calling up the register, bro.
So can I just add real quick? That's the thing that Aftab Malik actively does. Like he goes around like talking to people, saying like, discussing what sort of Islamophobic situation has happened to them, and therefore he pushes them to report it. So then he's basically saying that so much, I think, huge. I think he said something, it was like 200% of Islamophobic events don't get reported. So that's his whole shtick as well. And that's sort of, sorry, I'm just adding to what you're talking about.
Very welcome, Tanzania. I mean, but like this is sort of what Yassir is sort of saying. It's for me, it's just part of this self-sustaining industry, right? It's a little industry that this Islamophobia thing has become. The envoy is just one position, but it's also sustained by this like multiple bodies that are receiving funding. And for me, it's mind-boggling. Like I just cannot bring myself to understand how people cannot see this. Is that the very root cause of this problem is giving you money not to structurally deal with what they've created, which they never would, obviously, but to report the minute incidents, right, so that you can shut up and not worry about the bigger problem. Like this for me is just the mind-boggling nature of the crime that we're allowing ourselves to commit by falling into that trap. That instead of focusing on the bigger picture, which and none of these people do. None of these, sometimes some of them say, "Oh, why can't we do both?" Well, do both. Let me see you do both. But you won't, because you're being paid with certain conditions and your hands are tied. You can't put in that annual report that you release that Islamophobia is a structural problem created by Western governments who create a have and have not version of Islam, right? Which is driven by their foreign policy interests, which, by the way, are part of this ideological, bigger sort of worldwide historic phenomenon of oppressing the Muslim world. Like, no one's going to do that. They're not going to do that. They're not going to give you money to be able to say that. And so what are you saying? You're then forced to focus on the small I Islamophobia, these incidents that happen largely to our sisters, and the reflection that you made, yes, it is so correct about brothers not reporting, right? That it becomes a self-sustaining industry. So then the funding becomes all about keeping these reports going and the photo ops that come with that and the dinners and lunches and brunches and whatever that come with that, right? And you congratulate yourself for doing that, and it just becomes a self-sustaining industry. And then for the next round of funding to be justified, you need to show the reporting that you've done and how much data you've collected and so forth. And you never, ever, ever exit that trap of focusing on the bigger picture. You're always stuck dealing with the smaller stuff because that's what your purpose is.
There's a couple of good points there that you've made that I want to touch on and expand through my own view as well. And a question to you: why do you think brothers don't report? There is certain.
Honestly, I'll be very honest. I think it's very emasculating. I think it's very emasculating for a Muslim man who has a sense of izzah, of honor, of dignity. That if someone calls him a nickname on the street, that I go ring up a register and I report that. Like for me, runs against the entire.
We have a spiritual defense against it as well.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. There's tawakkul ala Allah and etc. So many things. Yeah.
But there's also, I absolutely agree with that. There's also, you want me to call the cops? You want me to rely on the system that?
Absolutely.
Like you think I believe? Like I've seen 800 cops smash in a door because of a plastic sword, man.
Can I add to that real quick? You know the story of the autistic boy that his parents actually even reported to the AFP, did all the correct steps according to, I guess, the Western lens, and then still got framed by the AFP that he was going to go do jihad, and then he got into a lot of situations.
There's a significant amount of distrust for government and policing, and it's a trauma response. If I see a car driving around my house, bro, I don't think terrorist, I think AFP. Right? We all joke about our phones being hacked. We don't have trust. I feel like you're going to come for me, right? You want me to, and on top of all of that, let's talk about Islamophobia register. I don't trust Islamophobia register. I know the history behind these people there.
Absolutely.
You're the ones who you're the ones who played good Muslim for 10 years.
Absolutely.
Right? And then you think I'm going to call you up.
Yeah.
All right. So there's a lot of feeling.
Absolutely. And I just want to caveat because I've got people that I know working with these people. There are some very good people that get wound up and caught up in some of these things. Right? They think that's the way to oppose. They think it's an act of resistance. And unfortunately, what I think they don't realize, they're being pulled in and sucked into a very dangerous game, which is self-perpetuating, and out of which there is no exit, aside from a very radical one, which refuses the premises on which these initiatives are set up.
So even if they're sincere and so forth, they have to address, you can't just say, come out and report. You have to address our trauma, our mistrust. And these are significant. This is what anti-racism is really about. That you have to center and focus the victims, quote unquote, of racism, that your own people. Like, there's no point saying report more without dealing with the significant psychological and legal and policing barriers to stop it. There's no point in you saying trust this register, trust these institutions, when there are significant divisions and inabilities for us to heal because those divisions have not been addressed. So I'm like, you can say, hey, go out and report, but it will be like throwing something in the wind. The work needs to be done. So when I talk about anti-racism as an act of self-determination, one of it is just investing more time with your own people. Like, you just have to go out there and continually. That's why I do courses and teach on the side for peanuts, because I'm like, this is my form of giving back. It's why I left academia to work at a school, Islamic school.
And look, I want to end on this question, and I know we sort of started with, well, we sort of almost got there, but I really want to end with. So you talked about, you answered my question, and we've weaved our way in and out of it, but it's really, we need our own institutions funded by the community if we're serious about doing something about this stuff. Otherwise, it's going to be left to individual actors and their time and initiative and podcasts and education sort of based initiatives. But let's speak very practically. We are in a reality. There is no rich businessman who's funding any anti-Islamophobia push or whatever. Let's get all those great hypotheticals out. What is your advice in the here and now? We are in April 2025. To the Muslim community, to sincere young Muslims or old Muslims or middle-aged Muslims who see this problem, what should they do in the current situation when it comes to how they should receive and respond to things like the Islamophobia envoy, and perhaps more broadly, this proliferation of Islamophobia bodies, given the realities of Islamophobia that we've discussed today?
So we're probably at a stage where we're going to have to lobby our own community and try to create the institutions in the foreseeable future. But you're right, it's not as simple as clicking your fingers. Politics is a contest. I'm involved as an educator. That's why I do these courses on Islamophobia, to try to lift the political consciousness around what it is. And hopefully that translates to an attachment to the ummah and the community. Like, you can be the best version of yourself, lawyer, engineer, whatnot, but you have to give something to your community, because that's our test to build ourselves up. So the first thing is to gather the right type of investors, the right type of people, put them together. Look, one of my frustrations with I won't mention them or name them, but this idea that we can do lots of things at once, we can't really, because look, bro, like, we all have 9-to-5 jobs. It takes our waking hours. We have our families, we have our ibadah, we have to worship, we have our hobbies, and, like, may Allah protect us all. We have, sometimes issues in health, disabilities in our family, all sorts of things. So life takes a lot from you, and then you have your own mental health struggles possibly. And then on top of all of that, you've got to do volunteer work in a very politically contested and difficult space. Some Muslims can hurt you and so forth. So a lot of people just tap out of the community.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So, what needs to be done is a rising of the political awareness of what we are, and then hopefully there can be investments. Hopefully. Like, I don't think it needs that much, but ultimately we have to pull all these people that can do these volunteer work, right? Instead of knocking door to door and telling us who to vote, just go to your own community and say, we need to build our own independent institution. Like, and there are other ways maybe possibly to do it. I don't know, this is maybe fiction, but if you can go to the main actors and movers in the halal industry and say, hey, up it by $1, and that $1 goes to a Muslim fund or goes to something. This is going to sound a weird phrase, a Muslim capitalism. The dollar goes in our community over and over and over again. Yeah? It sits with us, right? A Muslim, like, for me, I could, honestly, I've been in academia for 20 years. I could help the next generation of scholars on racism, and I have no access to them. Because I've got to do my day job, right? And if the community could help me mentor others, right? And that creates a mentor, and then you add lawyers to that, you add social media, you put them in a room together and let the magic happen. Now, what that means is, for the immediate future, bro, we have to lobby our own community. And unfortunately, here's the trick. We have to shift the mindset from rely on government to self-determination. And once that switch is done, then we hope, we hope, right, that they will put their investment in, they'll put their volunteer time in. Okay, now that's a political education, and unfortunately, right, we have very little avenues to politically educate. So it's a cycle, right? So just the people who have the capacity to volunteer. Keep going.
I mean, and I think this is like it's almost honestly, Tanzim, it's a podcast on its own. This idea of building the independent, modern diaspora-based Muslim community in our Western sort of context, from which can spring to sorts of institutions that we need. And you know what? I'll end on a classic example. We don't have something like a cage in this community, right? And I think that's telling for the fact that we are behind our counterparts in places like Britain, right? Even for the fact that the Muslim community in America is so cooked at times. They too, but you know, it's a massive community. It's 6-7 million people. So there are parts of it that are amazing, that are very grounded in tradition. And that's where you see some great initiatives, you know, pushing back. I mean, you've got Yaqeen, for example, as an example, a fantastic creator of content across the spectrum, political, spiritual, mental health, psychological, all that sort of stuff. And you don't have to agree with everything they produce, but at least it's an independent institution that doesn't take government money, that produces good content and helps guide Muslims, right? We've got One Path and other things over here in Australia. And we're seeing the emergence of a more mature community from which that can come. But I think Cage is, for me, the sort of example, right? It's almost like a traditionally minded think tank that helps lead the community response on these hot button issues of today. And it's funded by the community. And it has been for 15 years, right?
So well, I think come down here. Awesome did come down here. They tried to create something in Australia and New Zealand. Didn't take off. Different reasons. But that's another thing. On your point, bro, we can go to other Muslim communities around the world and create a similar model, borrow from them, take their name, let them guide us. But also, our neighbor is Indonesia, right? Like, there are Muslim societies, large ones, that we could create connections with and networks with, that can ultimately have convergent interests with exchanging ideas, economies, businesses, and so forth. My whole point, though, look, it starts with a fundamental shift. Like, you are speaking at a strategic level, and I really appreciate it. But the fundamental switch is we don't have to depend on anybody but ourselves. You know, I'm in a group, and we keep talking about what the alternative is to, say, electoral voting and party politics. And I keep saying create our own independent institutions. And then, subhanAllah, I'm not having a criticism of anybody. They're all sincere, beautiful people. May Allah reward them for their intention. I don't even have bad feelings towards Aftab, bro. It's not about that for me. It's yeah. So
you get on the person,
I barely know him, so there's no point in me trying to judge him as a person, right? You know what was interesting is that when we spoke about self-determined and independent institutions, there was still this idea that those institutions will be trying to lobby the Australian government. That's interesting, because when I'm thinking about creating an anti-Islamophobia institution, yes, maybe lobbying the government is part of it, but the vast majority of it is to give services and legal and mental health protection to Muslims. Education. It's like an institution for Muslims. It's not like I want to go convince and reform racists. No, I want Muslim excellence to be the ultimate cure to racism, right? And I want to build my own people. I don't maybe part of it will be lobbying, but really I prefer like a bunch of kick-ass lawyers who mess with us. You'll hear 100%. From them. Yeah,
and we've almost got that happening. Like, there are Muslim law firms that I'm sure we all know the names, may Allah reward them. And you know what? I'm going to say them because they deserve all the support from the community. And it's actually to the point of creating that ecosystem or economy of connected Muslims. So you've got Birchgrove Legal, you've got Khair Lawyers, you've got Majid, one of the brothers of Khair Lawyers. Like, these are guys, and Mustafa, big shout out to Mustafa Khair at Birchgrove. I mean, these are guys that have sort of stuck their neck out for the community, been there. Wow. We rely on them, we go to them. And it's like, it's not that far away. And I mean, there are conversations happening that I can't go into, but it's not that far away that the community couldn't do that. And I almost wonder...
Put them in a room with political theorists, with the mashayikh even, and we can create educational modules to lift the legal literacy of our people, lift the political literacy of our people, so that we lift the media literacy of our people, the right people. And the only criteria is we need to know that it's Ummah community first. Right? You're Australian. I don't mind this. We belong to this country. We're law-abiding, tax-paying citizens. I'm not asking you to hate anybody, but we have a particular Islamophobia that we have to address, and we need your expertise and skill. Put them all in a sphere and a space, and if you could fund them, ideally, and you give them day jobs, ideally, I promise you, that is more likely to generate future pathways to us than an independent MP in Parliament.
Yeah. Look, we've got to end at some point. It's 11:40 at night. It's been wonderful.
I might just quickly wrap up on a point. Yassir, like what you're describing, is it something like you talk about Muslim capitalism and economy?
Let's not call it Muslim capitalism, bro. Definitely not call it that.
I was stuck for words. And a Muslim economy where the Muslim dollar circulates within the community.
I think the Muslim economy is the best word. I've been using that for years now. I think, having worked in it quite intensively as well, I think Muslim economy is a fantastic word, or ecosystem. Yeah.
Is it something mirroring like the Nation of Islam, for example? Obviously, minus the theological aspects, but like how they, the people that got taxed, they put the pool of money together, invested in business, education, all that kind of knowledge. Like you could see that tight-knit community, that institution that was built.
In 2002, I read about the Jewish National Fund. Basically, the new Jewish National Fund is a way of collecting donations from Jewish diaspora communities around, who are, in some cases are very wealthy, and sending it back to Israel. And I asked, where's our Muslim National Fund, right? And it could be sent to Palestine, it could be internalized and so forth. Alhamdulillah, I heard last year the National Fund was being established and so forth. But that idea in itself, we can create, and of course it would have to include transparency and ethical obligations to not use and anti-corruption measures and all the rest, right? But yeah, bro, honestly, this sounds ideal, but if we're going to imagine a Muslim bloc, imagine this. Imagine every Muslim gave $5 a month, right, to a center to defend them legally and politically. $5 a month, right? Now, we don't need the 1 million Muslims in the country to do that, right? That's $5. Some can give more, right?
Yeah.
But if we can, the thing is to get them to that place, right, requires political knowledge. And that's the first obstacle, right? And it's tough. But even if we have to fight for 5 to 10 years, I'm sorry, we've wasted 20 years on contact theory, interfaith dialogue, and all the rest. It hasn't got us what we wanted. So it's a little bit like what you're saying. There are precedences in history, Tanzim, and we should learn from them.
We should talk about them. We should talk about them at some point, I think.
And I'm just going to mention this one point before I wrap up. Not necessarily a question. It's just because I feel like it's important to mention, after Malik making the statement in the Sydney Morning Herald, he said he wasn't, he was not pro-Palestinian or pro-Israeli, but pro-human dignity. And I thought that was just a really important point to mention, because that's, in his heart of hearts, I don't believe he actually believes that. But I feel like the state will make him say that to be that right temperature Muslim that you mentioned, that he has to play that game to be like, oh, I'm playing both sides or whatever, and I can't say like I'm pro Hamas or whatever, right? Like you can't say those words. Of course, So that's why I say those kind of phrases, and unfortunately that's very detrimental, right? It just speaks to how much you can sort of do in that little parameters set by the state, right?
Absolutely.
So that's just one thing to mention. And on top of that, like he also collaborates with his counterpart Gillian Segal, who's a special envoy to combat anti-Semitism. And the problem is Gillian Segal is a prominent Australian lawyer and business executive and a pro-Zionist. So he's collaborating with someone like that. Obviously, you can see how problematic it is. So I just wanted to mention that point because we didn't mention it at any point. But that's sort of what's happening. He's collaborating. He's saying these statements, very problematic. And you can't, sort of stuff we talked about, we need to build the community. We can't build the community for saying stuff like this, you know what I mean, taking, collaborating with the government. So
it speaks to Faraz's point earlier. Like, if you're going to take that role, it's going to have limitations and dictations and on how you can speak and what you can say.
Absolutely.
And you have to appeal and particularly, we all have to wear masks at various different points.
Yeah. I think it's a great way to put it, to be honest. I have no doubt he doesn't really believe that deep down. Like no Muslim, no sincere Muslim with a brain does, right? But you're in a trap. You've got your hands tied. And as Yassir said, the truth suffers, right? The truth is the first casualty of these sorts of positions and playing within the structure. And for some people, it's not that big a deal. And so for them, they'll play the game. But for any Muslim who can't fathom the idea of saying something so absolutely mind-blowing as that, they'll go ahead and do it. And that's what he's done.
Look, I understand, but we also have to speak to the great harm a statement like that does, right?
Yeah.
So it's a continuation of the gaslighting that Palestinians, firstly, and then broadly all pro-Palestinians and Muslims and Arab communities have had to watch. We are witnessing a genocide where Israel can kill 300 kids in a day, shoot down paramedics, bury them in an unmarked grave, lie about it, and that's just 1 week. And for you to say, I'm pro-human dignity, when there's a clear violence against Palestinians and a displacement. We've seen images of Gaza that have been reduced to rubble. For you to say that instantly, you need to clock, yes, okay, this is one side of politics wants me to speak like that, but how many Muslims am I going to alienate? How many people am I going to turn away? And for him to make that decision, right, tells me he chose them. He's their envoy, not ours.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a fantastic way to put it. Fantastic way to put it, yeah.
And good way to wrap it up, I say. So thank you for jumping on. I really enjoyed the conversation. Feel free to check out our previous episodes. We've done one with Muslim Vote Matters, etc. So others can check that out. Check us out on Instagram, Facebook. We're available on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, iTunes, etc. So give us a 5-star rating, inshallah, there. So from our special co-host today, Faraz, in the building, and from our special guest, Yassir, we wish you all the best. This is Tanzim signing off. Assalamu alaikum.